Good morning, everyone. It's the getting a little bit cold outside. Hanukkah is past, and that means the next holiday on our calendar is a fast day. We enter a bit of the slower season, which will be extended this year by an extra Adar, which means Purim will be a month later. So we have a little bit of a slow holiday season. We have a fast day of Asara B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet. We'll have a Tu B'Shvat. Maybe make Tu B'Shvat more desirable this year since we don't have as many holidays. But wanted to talk about fasting on a Friday. And this Friday is Asar B'Tevet. Asar B'Tevet is one of those minor, we call them fast days. You fast from the morning until the evening. And we have spoken before about the nature of these fast days and how they don't have the same resonance, and especially since they're shorter, they certainly don't have the feeling of a Yom Kippur, and they also don't have the gravitas of a Tisha B'Av, and we're left throughout the rest of the year trying to find a little bit more relevance for them. Those fast days, those public fast days during the course of the year, we have chronologically the order is Asara B'Tevet, the one that we're commemorating this Friday, the 10th of Tevet, and we'll look into that a little bit. The siege of Jerusalem. 17th of Tammuz was the breaking of the walls. Then you had Tisha B'Av, which was the destruction of the temple. Then you have the Tzom Gedalia, which was the end of sovereignty in the first period, end of the first temple period. And those are the fast days connecting to the temple and its destruction. Fast of Esther comes along after the Purim story, commemorating the war the Jews waged against their enemies on that day before Purim. Even though many people associated with the fasting of Esther before appearing before the king, that was Pesach and not Purim, and just another example of the confusion that can be wrought by the Jewish calendar. So it's these temple-centric fast days are the ones that stand out as a cycle, as a unit, and this will chronologically be the first. And something that is relevant this year, and I get our headline today comes from the OU's Jewish Action magazine, the current edition, which you can see is source number 1. The current fixed calendar has specific rules regarding which days of the week holidays and fasts can occur. With regard to the 4 fasts noted in Zechariah, 3 of them can fall on Shabbat. When Rosh Hashanah is on a Thursday, Friday, a 3-day Yom Tov in Israel, which occurs 31.89% of years, Tzom Gedalia is on Shabbat. Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, which are always the same day of the week as they're 3 weeks apart, can be on Shabbat 28% of the time. When these fast days occur on Shabbat, the fast is pushed off and observed on a Sunday. Additionally, of these 4, 3 can never fall on Friday. The fasts of Tammuz and Av can never fall on Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, and Tzom Gedalia can never fall on Sunday, Tuesday, or Friday. Asara B'Tevet is unique in 2 ways. It is the only fast that can fall on Friday, and is the only fast that cannot fall on Shabbat. As noted, Asar B'Tevet is the only fast that can fall on Friday. It happens that way 20% of the time, as it does this year, and again next year, and it will not land on Friday again until December 22nd, 2034, which means I can give this class this year. I probably can't give the class again next year because you'll all remember it. And please God, we'll have this class again. You can mark your calendars now in advance of December 22nd, 2034. But
Yom Kippur is on if Yom Kippur falls on a Saturday, you have to fast anyway.
Correct. We're going to talk about that. Correct. So really, we have to have an understanding of when we fast, when we don't fast. We're focused today on those fast days that are what we call the Tanis Tzibor, the public fast days, the temple ones in Tanis Esther. Yom Kippur stands out on its own. And we're going to see that there are those who would like to say that Yom Kippur and Asara B'Tevet, 10th of Tishrei, 10th of Tevet, have a very similar rules. But remember, right now, currently on our calendar, Asar B'Tevet is the only Jewish fast day that falls on Friday, and it's also the only one that can't fall on Shabbat. And we're going to see an interesting suggestion made, but what if it did? Even though it can't. Now it can't because we have a set calendar. But what about if we went back to using the lunar calendar?
And I can't hear the sound. Can't hear the sound.
So let's dig down into these fast days, how they came about, and how the laws developed on them. And in particular, obviously, the unique aspect of a fast day on a Friday gets us into a whole host of different halakhic questions. How does it end? What about Shabbos? What about Kiddush? What about the davening, et cetera, et cetera? So the article referenced the fast days in Zechariah. So this is the verse in Zechariah that's being referenced. Thus said God of hosts, the fast of the 4th month, the fast of the 5th month, the fast of the 7th month, and the fast of the 10th month shall become occasions for joy and gladness, happy festivals for the house of Judah, but you must love honesty and integrity. Zechariah is predicting a time that the fast days will turn from fasts into feasts. And he references the fasts of the 4th, the 5th, the 7th, and the 10th. Now, generally, and practically speaking, the fast of the 4th is Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz. The fast of the 5th is Tisha B'Av. The fast of the 7th is Tzom Gedalia. And the fast of the 10th is Asar B'Tevet. We're counting the months from Nisan, right? So if Nisan is month number 1, then the 4th is Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, 4 months, 17 Tammuz, 5 months Av, 7th month Tishrei, 10 months Teves. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah notes that not everyone agrees with this this calculus. Rabbi Shimon said Rabbi Akiva would expound 4 verses, but I would not expound the text as he did. One of the disputes relates to the fast mentioned by Zechariah, the fast of the 10th. This is the 10th of Teves, on which the king of Babylon laid siege to Jerusalem. Rabbi Shimon disagreed and said, I do not say this, but I expound the verse as follows. The fast of the 10th, this is the 5th of Tevet, on which the report reached the diaspora that the city had been smitten. Right, so Rabbi Shimon says the fast of the 10th month is not the breaching of the wall on the 10th of Tevet that preceded it's not the siege of Jerusalem on the 10th of Tevet that preceded the breach and the destruction. It's the 5th of Tevet that came afterwards. Chronologically, the fast of the 10th is not the first fast, but it's the last fast. And we're going to come back to this because it does highlight a little bit of the fuzzy nature of the 10th of Tevet. Right? Because if I would present to you the rationales for these fasts, the 17th of Tammuz, they broke the wall. 9th of they destroyed the temple. Fast of Gedalia, Jewish sovereignty ended. 10th of Tevet, they surrounded the city. But that's the beginning of the beginning of the beginning. Why is that warrant a fast day? But the idea of, so we have the 4 fasts that are mentioned. We've practically said that we're going to take the fast of Tevet, and that's the 10th of Tevet, and that's how it's going to be. And further proof is drawn from a pasuk in Yecheskel, the prophet Ezekiel, source number 4. In the 9th year, on the 10th day of the 10th month, the word of God came to me. O mortal, record this date, this exact day, Etzem Hayom Hazeh. For this very day, the king of Babylon has laid siege to Jerusalem. Now, this idea of the 10th of Tevet being the one that Rabbi Akiva, this is why Rabbi Akiva thought that the fast of Tevet, the fast of the 10th month should be the 10th of Tevet, because the date is actually recorded. But the unique expression, this exact date, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, that's being very specific. That's Yom Kippur type language. That's when we want to be very specific about something. And this led to the theory, it is a theoretical possibility, that Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, just like Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh means, like Al mentioned before, that when Yom Kippur is on Shabbos, we fast on Shabbos. When it means when Asara B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet, falls out on Shabbat, we would still fast the 10th of Tevet on Shabbat. The asterisk is this never is going to happen practically. But if it did happen, the 10th of Tevet, we would fast on Shabbos. And this is mentioned by Rabbi David Avudraham. He seems to have this tradition. It's source number 5, and we will read along in the Hebrew and then translate as well. So this is in his, basically Rabbi David Avudraham has an order of kind of around the year, right? And we're talking about, he's writing now in the 14th century. He's a source of Jewish practice and custom and liturgy. Kind of his book is the Seder, is the order, like the Siddur, but it was the order of around the year. So he says that there's a difference between the Arbat Somos Henidachim Lifamim Kishachalu b'Shabbat, that the 4 fasts would usually be pushed off if they fell on Shabbos. Like we know, Tisha B'Av falls on Shabbos, we fast on Sunday. 17th of Tammuz, same thing, we fast on Sunday. The difference is going to be, he's going to mention, if Purim falls out on Sunday, Tanis Esther can't be on Shabbos, and you can't push it forward because of Purim, so you have to move it earlier. But he says, Chutz miyud b'teves, except the 10th of Teves, she'eino chol yolam b'Shabbos. It never falls on Shabbos. But it falls on Friday, and we do fast on Friday. If it did fall on Shabbos, but it can't, but if it did, you couldn't push it to another day. Because it says on this day, on this exact day. So therefore, the 10th of Tevet is always observed on the 10th of Tevet, even if it falls on Shabbos. It's not going to happen that way, but it could. And he goes on to say, other fast days will never fall on Friday. And also, is the 13th of Adar, which is the fast of Esther, fell on Shabbos. We move it earlier to the Thursday before, which is the 11th of Adar. You're not able to push Tanis Esther forward like we push the 17th of Tammuz to Sunday or the Tisha B'Av to Sunday. It's Purim. You can't move Tanis Esther onto Purim. We can't move Tanis Esther and make it earlier on Friday and fast then because of all of the many prayers and petitions. And that's not the right thing to do. You shouldn't move the fast of Esther with all of its fasting and prayers to Friday, because it would interfere in your Shabbos preparations. Gaonim, I found this discussion among the Gaonim, the earlier sages. Even Tisha B'Av, which is such a serious fast, upon which all the future tragedies of the Jewish people are based upon, you push it off from Shabbos. But Asar B'Teves, if it falls on Shabbos, you'll fast on Shabbos. But it won't, so you won't have to, but you could. So that is, there are 2 things that emerge out of this Avudraham. One, Asar B'Teves seems to have extra attention paid to it because of the fact that it says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, on that day, which means that theoretically we fast on Shabbos. And also this idea that gets introduced that fasting on Friday is not preferable. We don't want you to be fasting on Friday because that interferes with your Shabbos preparation, which now gets us into a little bit of a discussion because, well, how are we going to be fasting this Friday? If it's such a bad idea to fast on Friday, why is Asar B'Teves on Friday? If we say the Etzem Hayom Hazeh, that seems to be what pushes it forward. We shouldn't be fasting this Friday either, but just as Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, Asar B'Teves is so significant you fast on that day no matter what, you'd fast on Shabbos, then for sure you fast on Friday. We'll have to unpack that a little bit. We'll stop and see if there are any questions or comments at this time.
A doctor once told me fasting once a month is very healthy.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we see how popular these days this whole, fasting, periodically 18 hours for fasting, 6 hours for eating, all that kind of stuff seems to be popular. Right, it's interesting. If you'll just do a Google search for fasting, there's a lot more out there on religious fasting for Christians than there is for Jews. And we spoke about fasting for Israel, and we spoke about fasting in times of difficulty. I would say that we've lost our appetite for fasting as a Jewish community. And so much of there's a whole discussion in the Talmud, the relevance of the public fast days nowadays. Right? We know Yom Kippur is a biblical holiday. It's not the same as fasting out of sadness and commemorating tragedy. We can appreciate the role of Tisha B'Av as a fast day that is the springboard for all other Jewish tragedies. But the Talmud talks about, like, for example, what happened during the Second Temple period. During the Second Temple period, did they fast all of those fasts that were instituted to commemorate the destruction of the First Temple? Right, and so the Talmud introduces this idea of if in times of discord, in times of difficulty, times of milchama, conflict, then Jews should be fasting. In times of shalom, when things are completely stable, like the Second Temple period, there's a reason not to fast. What happens if there's ein milchama, ein shalom? Let's say there's no safety and security, but there's still some insecurity. And so the Talmud even introduces an idea of ratzu misanin, ratzu ein misan. If the Jewish community wants to fast, then they'll fast. If they don't want to fast, they won't fast. Now, you see source number 6, which is from the Torah, points out that nowadays, v'ha'idna, ratzu v'nagu lisanos. Ratzu, the Jewish community writ large has spoken and wants to fast. You're not allowed to say, oh, we don't want to fast. Right? So the Torah is building upon that line of thought introduced in the Talmud, that if things are neither not too bad and not too good, the Jewish community decides. The Torah says, well, the Jewish community has decided, and we fast. The kosher came in Dorosenu, now especially in our generation, right? When he's talking about the 1400s, he's talking about the 1400s, 15th century. How much more so in our time? He sees the fast days as being significant. Doesn't even say that they are rabbinically ordained. He sees them as divrei Kabbalah. And in takanat neviim, this is not generally a halachic term. Usually we assume neviim do not have the ability to introduce halacha. But here, since these are mentioned in the biblical works, midivrei Kabbalah, and the rabbis have endorsed them, and throughout the last, in his time, 1,000 years, Jews have been fasting, he sees it as almost as a rule that you cannot violate. And even though we may live in times that might fit the criteria of we can choose whether to fast or not, gotta fast. But if they ever fall on Saturday, you push them off to Sunday. This is essentially the rabbinic disagreement with Yehud Ham. Right? Yehud Ham says Asar B'Teves, we'd fast on Friday. It never falls on Friday, but we would. The Torah summarizes the rabbinic opinion that rejects it, while also letting us know something about the fast days. It should be noted that, other than the Yom Kippur, which is a different category, and Tisha B'Av, which has more significance because it's a 24-hour fast, a lot of leniencies built into the fasting. If you don't feel well, don't fast. And there are a lot more leniencies when it comes to fasting, and so much so that in some significant parts of the Orthodox, even the yeshivish ultra-Orthodox community, there are a lot of leniencies when it comes to fasting. If it interferes, it doesn't mean that we're getting rid of the fast days, but yes, they're on the books, but they are the way the fast days have been established as being binding upon us today are not necessarily fun. It's not the same thing as Hanukkah. It's not the same thing as Purim. It's not the same thing as Yom Tov Sheni. The fast days commemorating, what they commemorate are important, but these fast days, especially the 4 Tanis Tzibur daytime fasts that we have, we're going to be willing to make significant exceptions as needed. Asar B'Tevet, and remember, we're going to have to come back and explore. Maybe there was a machlokes whether the fast of Teves is the 10th of Teves or the 5th of Teves. We've accepted it as the 10th, but the very fact that there's this disagreement makes this fast maybe a little bit more tenuous. And think about the reason given. It's the siege. It's not the breach. It's not the destruction. It's not the end of independence. It is the day they surrounded the walls. So when it was, let's talk a little bit more about fasting on Friday at this point. Any questions or comments, thoughts, reactions in terms of the fasting, in terms of this piece? So let's get down to business of fasting on a Friday. We're fasting on this Friday, even though we really shouldn't be fasting on Friday. Shulchan Aruch, source number 7. On Friday, it is forbidden to partake of a celebratory feast that one would not ordinarily partake of on a weekday. This is so even if it is an erusin, a wedding meal, because of the honor of Shabbat, the one will enter Shabbos desiring to eat and partake of Shabbos meal with an appetite. Right? All day this is forbidden. We don't want you to overeat on Shabbos because you have to eat on Shabbos. It is the way of the people of action, Anshe Maseh, to fast on every Erev Shabbat. So on a certain level, fasting on Friday is a good thing because we'll be entering Shabbos hungry, which is what you want it to be. The Mishnah Berurah, source number 8, captures the reaction of the commentaries to the Shulchan Aruch by pointing out that there are a number of the authorities in the bold you should not fast on Friday because you don't want to go in too aggrieved. You don't want to enter Shabbos with that headache. You don't want to enter Shabbos. You don't want your preparations to be adversely impacted by your fasting. Unless it's the type of person that eating even a small amount will ruin their appetite Friday. They then do it. But if, typically speaking, if you're miserable, if you don't eat all day, then you're not the type of person who should be fasting on Friday. So we want you to have an appetite, don't eat too much, but we don't want you to be miserable, that it impacts how things will take place over Friday as you start Shabbos. So fasting on Friday, on the one hand, does not provide, has a certain benefit, but maybe fasting the entire day is going to be more problematic. Howard, yes, you got a question.
I think I once had a Seudah on Friday for Purim, and it had to be before half the day. Doesn't that relate to this idea that you should not eat?
It relates to the idea of wanting to make sure you start Shabbos with the right way, with a good meal. Now, on Purim, they talk about two different options when Purim falls on Friday, because Purim can fall on Friday. One, they say have your Seudah in the morning. And then, you have a bagel for breakfast, and that's your Purim Seudah. At the same time, it seems that the preferable time for the Purim Seudah is the afternoon. So one of the other suggestions is you start your Purim Seudah right as Shabbos is starting, and then you break, you serve the first course, and then you break and you serve the second course. It's a little bit tricky because your benching is complicated and the like. Part of this also relates to, I guess, portion control. How much should you eat, right? People think a meal has to be a lot of food, right? Technically speaking, a meal can, you wash and you bench, you covered a meal, right? This is especially relevant because we're going to, obviously one of the relevant variables on fasting on Asar B'Teves on Friday is, let's face it, these are the shortest days of the year, right? The fast begins something like at 6 o'clock and ends something like 5 o'clock. So wake up, eat breakfast, and you won't digest your breakfast. It'll be time to make Kiddush already. So it's very, now you might be waking up earlier than usual. It might disrupt your flow, but it doesn't have to ruin your day. When it comes to it's similar to the idea that this time of year, what about having Shalosh Seudos, the third Shabbos meal, right? Friday night you have dinner, Shabbos morning day you have lunch. What about Shalosh Seudos? Well, in the summertime when Shabbos ends at 9 o'clock at night, it's 8 o'clock at night. You're usually in the mood for something to eat by then. But what about now when it's 4:30 in the afternoon? Who wants to eat again? That's not the Shabbos fault. That's how much you ate at lunch. The idea. So there's a whole idea that now the fact that necessarily we're not so good at dividing our meals is why Shalosh Seudos has developed a reputation as not being as significant, or have a cookie, or have something else. But technically speaking, it's up to us to control, the intake over the course of the day so that we can eat Shalosh Seudos. But, so the idea of leaving it up to us. Like the Purim example is something that is relevant here. And with regards to Asar B'Teves, fasting on Friday doesn't have to be the biggest deal if we schedule ourselves appropriately. So what about this fasting on Friday? So we saw Shulchan Aruch says you can't eat too much, and maybe it's a good thing to fast. Commentary is responding, maybe it's a bad thing to fast because we don't want it to ruin your Friday or entering into Shabbos. Now, there are certain fast times that person volunteers to fast. So there's what's called the Tanis Yachid. An individual decides they want to fast for whatever reason. We talked a little bit about this when we talked about fasting for Israel. Or there's a fast that some people take upon themselves if they have a terrible dream. So let's say a person finds themselves fasting on Friday. That's source number 9. If one accepts upon himself to fast on Erev Shabbos, one must fast until the stars come out, unless he clarifies at the time of acceptance of the fast until the congregation finishes its prayer. Right? You have this question because usually, what are we doing on Friday? Friday, you have candlelight, you have davening, you go home, you make Kiddush. It's not necessarily nightfall. It might be, but it's not necessarily. And usually our fasts don't go from sunrise to sunset. They start before sunrise, about an hour or so before, and they don't end at sunset. They end around 40 minutes after. So if we are now saying that you have to fast on Friday till 40 minutes after sunset on Friday, what are we requiring you to do? Fast on Shabbos. And that, we can't fast on Shabbos. Well, maybe since it's Asar B'Teves, you could. So that's actually might be why the Avudah Ham said you could. Avudah Ham said 10th of Teves never falls on Shabbos, but if it did, you'd have to fast. Well, maybe here that could explain why he's saying that, because we are forcing you to fast into Shabbos. And this we don't have so the Shulchan Aruch doesn't talk about fasting on Asar B'Teves, but does talk about if a person's fasting on Friday, that Friday fast extends until the stars come out, unless on Thursday you said I'm only going to fast until the end of davening. The Ramah, Yesh Omrim, there are those who say that one does not complete the fast except for when they leave the shul to eat. Therefore, for an individual fast, one does not complete it. It's good to clarify this at the time of acceptance. During a public fast, one completes the fast, and this is our custom. Ramah mentions a couple of opinions, seems to conclude that, yes, you should fast until 40 minutes after sunset, but does say there are those who say that on Friday you can't complete the fast because it's Shabbos, and you can eat once you get out of shul. If the fast is undertaken because of a disturbing dream, then you have to fast the whole way through. But so the Ramah introduces the possibility that a Friday fast does not extend to the usual fast conclusion time. It ends when shul is over. Mishnah Berurah, source 10, right? He feels that this opinion that the Ramah quotes, that you don't complete the fast, is on a private fast or even a public fast. Kegon Asar B'Teves Shechol B'Erev Shabbos. When 10th of Teves falls on a Friday and you're fasting on a Friday, Lo Yisane Rak Asher Yetzem Yibes HaKnesses, you only fast until you leave shul. Does Kvar Kiblu Shabbos B'Tfilah Shemitzvalim Plag Mincha Eila, because you've already accepted Shabbos. You can have accepted Shabbos already at 3:30 in the afternoon. And therefore, and it's considered you fasted the whole day. If you're fasting until you daven. Now, that does not seem to be the more prevalent view, and usually we recommend the fast not ending. If you look at the times, for example, I think candle lighting this week is at 4:11, and I think that at least in Atlantic Beach, New York, we're having the fast end at 5:06. So we're waiting about a half hour, 35 minutes after sunset. Now, the truth is shul won't end till then, although I'm feeling a little bit of pressure. Usually Friday night, we have davening and the Dvar Torah. I'm thinking, my Dvar Torah will extend the shul by a couple of minutes. People get home later. I don't know. Maybe we have to curtail the Dvar Torah. There's no reason to extend it. People are fasting. So we'll have to wait and see. Those who come to shul Friday night, we'll find out. My Dvar Torah will be, the Dvar Torah is curtailed because everyone has to go home and eat. But we see that there's a little bit of that tension, that Friday fast is not so much a problem with fasting on Friday. It could be a good thing to fast on Friday. You'll have a good appetite for Shabbos dinner. But that little piece of Shabbos that you're fasting, we're uncomfortable with. And even though it seems that we've made our peace with it and the fast once Shabbos has started, there is that opinion that feels no. Friday afternoon, you go to shul. And this week, Shabbos Mincha has to start earlier because we have laning and we have the fast day Haftorah, and we have Anenu, right? We don't have Avinu Malkeinu, so it's a pretty compact addition to the service, but you got to start about 10 minutes earlier. But and then we'll go to shul, and then it could be that once shul is over, the fast is over, because we don't like this idea of fasting into Shabbos, and that's the complexity of Friday. And the Midrash talks about this, recognizes this tension, because it starts talking about Tanis Esther on Friday, or the possibility of Tanis Esther on Friday, right? It says you're not allowed to fast on Shabbos, source number 11. If the 14th of Adar falls on Shabbos, you're not allowed to fast. You wouldn't be allowed to be fasting on Shabbos. For on Sunday, you can't fast on Shabbos, and on Friday, you can't fast Tanis Esther either. Why Torah Shabbos? Because we don't want it to interfere in your Shabbos preparations. Like we said before, Tanis Esther, we fast on Thursday. If the 14th falls on Saturday, Asur Lisanos Be'erev Shabbos Torah Shabbos. Sheikar Tanis Lichorach and Huv Asim Kvod Shabbos. We don't want to interfere with your Kvod Shabbos. Ukvod Shabbos Adif Me Elef Tanis. Honoring Shabbos and properly is more important than 1,000 fastings. So this fasting on Friday is not really such a positive thing. Now, we may be stuck when it comes on Tanis Asar B'Teves because it's the only fasting that we have that could fall on a Friday. And as we saw, the Etzem Hayom Hazeh, there is that unique language for Tanis Asar B'Teves, which doesn't exist by any other fast day. And maybe you thought, last but not least, it's 10 hours long. This is not a big deal, right? I know even if a person is not fasting, you don't have that much time on Friday anyway. And so I think that those factors all together came together to, I guess, not even begrudgingly recognize that it's a fast day, and we're going to fast on Asar B'Teves on Friday, and it's not going to impact our lives so much. And we're not even going to worry so much about making Kiddush the second Shabbos starts, because let's face it, how often are we concerned about that in general? We're generally not worried about making Kiddush the moment Shabbos starts. We go to shul, we daven, we get home, especially this time of year. Who wants to start the meal at 5:15? So we're cognizant of the fact that Friday is a special day when it comes to getting us ready for Shabbos. We don't want to fast. Most of the time we don't have a choice because the fast days don't fall on Friday. With Tanis Esther, where we're given the opportunity, possibly we push it off and say, we're not going to do that. And as Rabbi Eliezer Malamed points out, right, when source number 12, when the Asar B'Teves falls on Friday, the practice is to break the fast even after Shabbos has already started. That's what we do. I would certainly say two things. One, if a person has difficulty fasting, isn't feeling well, anyway, you should break the fast, especially these quote-unquote minor fasts. And B, if you're really, really starving, you get home from shul, and it's still not 5:06, you got to make Kiddush. That's also okay, based on the Yesh Omrim that was explained by the Ramah in source number 9, explained in source number 10. Howard, I see you have a question, and then we'll take anyone else.
A couple of things. Wouldn't it be a practical thing to daven mincha on time and then just wait? There's no obligation to daven Maariv as soon as Shabbos starts. So then you would continue the fast, and then you start Maariv at 5:06, and there'd be no problem.
So first of all, you don't have to wait to 5:06 to daven Maariv. And in fact, most of the time, if this was a weekday, we would be home well before 5:06, because we'll daven mincha after sunset, daven Maariv, and get home, as the fast is ended. I think there still is that sensitivity to the fact that it's Friday into Shabbos. On the one hand, it's okay to go in hungry. On the other hand, we don't want people to be like, oh man, I got to fast now that it's Shabbos. We're sensitive. Shabbos is better, as the Midrash said. Honoring Shabbos is more significant than 1,000 fasts. So we're still sensitive to that. So it could be, based on your suggestion, I should give my full Dvar Torah this Friday night. But we'll have to ask the people who show up whether they think that's the way to go or not.
And the other thing, isn't the Tanis Esther sort of a less of a important fast, and that's why it's not goes to Friday, it goes to Thursday? So
Tanis Esther is unique in the fact that it doesn't seem to commemorate anything bad. If it commemorates anything, it commemorates the fasting the Jews did on the day that the Persians were fighting against their enemies. So it doesn't have the same penitential, prayerful nature as those that are commemorating destruction, like these fast days. So so because of that, there are those who see it as even reason to be more lenient. But it's also kind of a good segue to talk a little bit about, as we raised at the beginning, Asar B'Teves is strange. Right? We saw Rabbi Shimon doesn't even like the idea of commemorating the surrounding of the city, because why is that so terrible? He wanted to commemorate the bad news penetrating into the diaspora. So maybe we'll dig a little bit into the about what makes Asar B'Teves so fast worthy to close things out. So what about that in terms of commemorating the beginning of the beginning of the beginning? So Rabbi Ephraim Mervis, when talking about this a couple years ago when Asar B'Teves fell on Friday, says in the story of the mythical town of Chelm in Poland, in which there was one little bridge over the valley. People noticed there was a crack in the bridge, causing some people to trip and fall. The crack widened until some people were breaking their legs. It widened further, and there was a danger that people might fall through it. And then when the gap became exceptionally wide, people, wagons, and horses were falling down to the valley below. What did they do? The Council of the Sages of Chelm decided to deliberate on the issue. At the end of the entire day's discussion, they announced a decision. They would build a hospital in the valley below. Now, why is this Chelm? Well, why don't they fix the bridge? And why you fix the bridge at the beginning? Had they fixed the bridge when it was small at the beginning, the minimal damage would have happened. It would have been very easy to fix the bridge. Now that the bridge is unfixable, they're going to build a hospital and to deal with the tragedies after the fact. So, the nimshal, what this applies to is, when is the most important time in the story? At the end when they build a hospital, or at the beginning when they could have fixed the crack? And it highlights the fact that it's the beginning, which by the time you get to the end is the more lamentable moment. And the same thing is true with the destruction of the temple. Right? Obviously, we mourn on Tisha B'Av and when they broke into the city, but when the siege started, that was the time for action. That was the time to try to do something. That's the lamentable moment when all the tragedy started. As Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein explained, source number 14, why do we mark the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem, not just breaching of the walls or the destruction of the temple? The message of this commemoration is that after the destruction, we must trace its sources and mark its stages. We must look backwards to events that are not earth-shattering and perceive how the seeds of the destruction of the 9th of Av were planted on the 10th of Tevet. The more we study history, the more we learn, and we should not concentrate only on the final act, the cataclysmic event itself, but also on all the stages that led up to it. The moral message that arises from this is the importance of sharpening our consciousness of the unfolding of the past, seeing how the branches sprout forth from the roots. This has great significance with relation to the Holocaust, not so much the Holocaust itself, but rather its roots. How did such a phenomenon ever come to be? With hindsight, we have to look back at what comes before, what the roots of the Holocaust were, and what moral lessons may be learned from them. Anytime there's a great tragedy, ultimately you're going to want to look back and figure out the root causes. We hear that being discussed now with everything going on in Israel. Right now is not necessarily the time, but ultimately you have to learn the lessons of how you get to this point. And that could be a message of Asar B'Teves. And the fact that Asar B'Teves, the fast of the 10th of Tevet, has this message different than just commemorating the destructions, of trying to create more of a historical consciousness and be aware, more sensitive to ensure events don't happen, mistakes don't get made again. It has less of a direct commemorative reason than the others, and especially if you throw in Rabbi Shimon's argument that the 10th of Tevet doesn't really even deserve to be commemorated unless you attach this kind of historical consciousness, the Rabbi Mervis, Rabbi Lichtenstein reference. This is what led to the 10th of Tevet being declared as a memorial day for all of those whose yurt sites during the Holocaust were not known. In Israel, they call Asar B'Teves Yom HaKadish HaKlali. If someone lost a relative, someone was murdered in the Holocaust, you don't know the yurt site, you should make it the 10th of Teves. And in a sense, it was revolutionary because many felt just go to Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is our national day of mourning, and some, in fact, did and were critical of the decision made by the rabbinic establishment that set up 10th of Teves as a commemoration day. But Asar B'Teves made sense because it's not a day that's anchored necessarily in commemorating a tragic event. It's commemorating tragedy in general, what happened before, as in commemorating into the future some of the origins. And the idea of it it was a day ripe for adding additional significance. It's not like 17 Tammuz and 9 Av, or even 3 Tishrei, Tzom Gedalia. It's unique, and the fact that it has this element of historical consciousness and contemplation and memorialization, it became good to be connected with the Holocaust. And source number 15 is an article by Rav Chorch, where he talks about this idea of person who doesn't know when the yurtzeit falls gets to choose the date. He says Asar B'Teves, which was chosen by the chief rabbin, it makes a lot of sense. It's 4 lines down, in the middle of the line. He says, for a number of reasons. One, Shehu Hayom Shebo Hechelu Hatzaros. It's the beginning of all the tragedies, right? That's when it all began. V'chol Hatzaros v'hatlaos shekaru l'umasenu hakohu me'oso hemshech mar. Look, if we're trying to understand the root cause of it all, including the Holocaust, it all starts back then. So this is a good day to commemorate the yurtzeits. And then he says, Yemei Teves Kitzarim Hema. They're short. And he goes on to talk about the idea that on yurtzeits, the practice was to fast on a yurtzeit. Nowadays, we've inverted that to having a l'chaim on a yurtzeit, but it was to fast on a yurtzeit. And he says it would actually be very appropriate to fast for those murdered in the Holocaust, fast on their yurtzeit. May as well pick the shortest day possible, Asar B'Teves. And people are fasting anyway, so you kind of you're both commemorating them, and you're commemorating them by fasting on the yurtzeits, which is the optimal manner, which is how they should be commemorated anyway. And therefore, he says, it's a win-win-win situation, even though it is a tragic commemoration. And then Rabbi Yaakov Ariel points out that this is actually a pretty good thing, right? Especially because the Holocaust is something that, as we grow further and further from it, as he mentions in source 16, as the community of survivors dwindles, right? We have to continue to impress upon the public not to forget that which Amalek did to our generation, encourage the entire public to recite the Kaddish. He sees it as a helpful commemoration. And why that can't also be Yom HaShoah, we've talked about in a different discussion, but it highlights that the Asara B'Teves is unique. It's the only fast that we have on Friday. Even though we don't normally like to fast on Friday, we will fast on Friday, and we may even theoretically been willing to fast on Shabbos. But its unique nature may originate from how it was introduced in the first place. We know that it commemorated the destruction, the siege of the city, or maybe it commemorated, or maybe it shouldn't be Asar B'Teves, commemorates another event. But that murky nature of why we're fasting, because it's the beginning of the beginning, may be to teach us this lesson of having this historical sensitivity to have a little bit more of a sharper awareness of the causes of why things have happened and how we got to this day, which also made it ripe for being the Yom HaKadish HaKlali, shortest fast day of the year. Look, this Friday, you blink, you miss it. But this is what we will be doing. Feel free to have your breakfast before 6. You should be able to make it to just past 5. And it definitely has what to commemorate, have us thinking about. And as Zachariah said, one day, hopefully these days will turn from fasts into celebrations and feasts.
Rabbi,
Shakawach, Rabbi, thank you.
Rabbi, I have a
Beautiful.
question.